Really wish you the best in your move to New York. You know, you got 800 boxes and 600 of those boxes are books. And so we're gonna dig into some of that Paideia today, some of that wisdom that you have for us. And you know, one of the things that you mentioned that you frequently reminded me of when I studied with you at Harvard was the importance for our values to be applied consistently across all human rights movements. So in that spirit, my sisters and I designed this teaching for educators who we believe have the moral courage to teach that lives of our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters matter in this world. Having you as my teacher, Dr. West, has had a profound impact on my consciousness and the importance of staying close to those who suffer the most in our world. We talk often about how the traditions of Jerusalem and Athens have influenced you, specifically referencing Parrhesia and Paideia. Can you start off by telling us what these two Greek words are and why they're so important to the lives of our students, classrooms, and to our democratic experiment happening within the context of this American empire?
Wonderful question. No, brother. Well, one is, you see, I believe that we're living in a moment of spiritual decay and moral decrepitude. By spiritual decay, I mean a callousness toward the suffering of others and an indifference toward the plight, especially of the highly vulnerable, those who are pushed to the margins, those whose suffering is rendered invisible. Now, moral decrepitude has to do with a relative lack of integrity, honesty, decency, and generosity. And paideia, you know, in the Greek, it means deep education, very different than cheap schooling. Now, schooling's a wonderful thing, access to skills and what have you, but no, we're talking about something much more profound than that. And what the Greeks had in mind was a deep education that generates an attention to those things that matter: life, death, joy, sorrow, justice, injustice. And it meant a cultivation of a critical sensibility, a critical consciousness, the way in which my dear brother Edward Said talked about it, or the way in which Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel would talk about it: a noble discontent, a critical discontent. And then at the same time, an attempt to ensure that with our attention and with our wrestling with critical sensibility, we learn how to act courageously, to take a risk. So to take, for example, just very briefly, Socrates in Plato's Apology, line 38a, the unexamined life is not worth living. Line 24a, the cause of my unpopularity, Parrhesia, fearless speech, unintimidated speech, courageous speech. So the fusion between paideia, deep education, attention, critical sensibility, acting courageously based on integrity, honesty, consistency, and then recognizing, like Socrates, it could be like Jesus, it could be like Muhammad, it could be like Fannie Lou Hamer, it could be like, you know, Max Roach. I mean, all of the truth tellers get in trouble. They cut against the grain. Mm-hmm. They're in the world, but not of the unfair world. They're trying to be a light in the midst of so much grimness and so much dimness. And the important thing, and just one last point here, though, brother, is that you know, we got to have some fun doing it, though, man. You know,
right.
You want to do it with style. You want to do it with a smile. There's great joy in serving others. Our precious Jewish brothers and sisters, in their scripture, the spreading of Hesed, that steadfast love, that loving kindness to the orphan and widow. You ought to find joy in spreading that Hesed. This is not something that you walk around slumped over with, because the suffering is so overwhelming. If you don't find joy in struggling against it, then you're not going to be a long distance runner. You're going to be overwhelmed by the suffering. And of course, when it comes to any oppressed people, let alone my precious Palestinian brothers and sisters, whose suffering is so often rendered invisible, that you got to find a joy in being in solidarity with a truth-telling and a justice-seeking and a love-bearing, because we're in love with oppressed peoples, no matter who they are.
Mhm.
But in this case, we're talking about our precious Palestinians tonight.
I appreciate that, Dr. West.